Just make sure. Looks like we are live on YouTube.
Nice. Yes, we are.
Perfect.
So welcome everyone to the 20 hours cluster stream.
The 24-hour cluster stream. You folks asked for it. Here we are. Just kidding.
Just kidding. Yeah.
Hello, Ben. Hello, Ratius.
Hello, hello.
Let me just make sure I keep my Twitch stream open in the background.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna go 3 screen setup soon because it's becoming not enough.
Welcome, everybody.
Welcome.
Maybe we'll give everybody like a minute to filter in.
Yeah.
But yeah, today I think we're going to talk about something that Mattia's actually been working on, sort of experimenting with, which is obviously we all know that, obviously we all know that TypeScript-Go is a thing. And while the TypeScript-based language server does work with Effect 4.0, it does not currently integrate with TypeScript-Go. However, Mattia's been working on kind of a parallel fork of the TSGo repository, which embeds the LSP functionality. So maybe I'll hand it over to Mattia and you can talk a little bit about it.
Yeah, sure. So as Maxwell pointed out, the team around TypeScript itself has announced almost 1 year ago, a little more than 1 year ago, that for the new version of TypeScript, they are gonna use Go. And the entire TypeScript repository has now a parallel version called TypeScript-Go. And people have really started playing around with it. It is almost, I would say, almost 100% feature parity with the classic TypeScript, with recent features for what's type checking and compilation. It has some quirks, but it's still already in the parity part of the features. But the editor experience is completely different story. Why? Because now we are not a plugin that's written in JavaScript. So that means that now TypeScript cannot load plugins anymore. And we have not yet a full picture from the official TypeScript team, but the thing makes sense because now the language service is a native binary. So allowing to load whatever inside of it, probably not the best, both in terms of performance and both in terms of security. So that points out to the story for the Effect TypeScript plugin. So as you know, Effect has, maybe let's start by sharing my screen, if I can. Share a screen. Allow. I want to share this screen. Yes. Okay, you should be able to see my screen, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes. So as you may already know, Effect had a previous language service that has a lot of interesting features, but the most interesting ones are the diagnostics. And this is written in TypeScript. So what we have found out while writing this language service is that for diagnostics with Effect to be meaningful, we need a lot of type information. So that means that we cannot build something that is, for example, in JavaScript and calls the TypeScript-Go APIs, because we would be cluttering the and limiting the performance by the communication bridge. So that means that the only approach that we had for going on with, the only approach that we had for the TypeScript-Go version of the Effect language service is basically to write some kind of fork of TypeScript-Go. And that's where we've created the new TSGo repository that you can find inside of the Effect organization. So this is a fork, but it's not a fork in a classic manner, in the sense that we have taken the repository, cloned, and changed everything, and we started diverging from that. But it's more a fork in a sense that, in the same way OXC lint does type-aware linting, the way we do is that we have an inner copy of the TypeScript-Go sources, and then we basically recompile the standard TypeScript-Go binary by adding points where we can inject our diagnostics. So that means that the new TSGo that Effect provides can run both as standard replacement for your TypeScript-Go, and it will result in the same behavior. But if you enable in your tsconfig the language service plugin, that means that you now start getting the Effect goodies in a TSGo way. Okay, so I have been too much boring, so I suggest that maybe, yeah, I see people that requested the cat. But yeah.
No one cares about the LSP. Bring the cat
Yeah,
back.
no one cares. Everyone wants to see my cat. Okay, I'll show you the cat in the end. And I think that maybe we should go on and just show quickly how you can set it up, try it for yourself, and also beware that given TypeScript-Go is a beta, I consider this version of the language service an alpha because it's built on beta features. So it's like more unstable than the TypeScript compiler itself. But feature-wise is almost in parity with the previous implementation we had. So that said, how do you get started with it? Well, it's very simple. You just run pmpx at effect/tsgo setup, and you hit enter. And now it will go through a guided setup that basically will set up the basics you need in order to get this new version to work. First, you need to provide your basic tsconfig, where the LSP rules may already be configured or needs to be configured if it's a project that you are starting with from scratch. Then it will ask where you want to install the language service, usually in dev dependencies. And then it asks you if you want to customize the behavior of the diagnostics, because in the Effect LSP, you can change the severity for each diagnostics. So that, for example, based on the way you code, if you do, for example, heavy LLM-based coding, you can like ramp up the severity of specific diagnostics in order to let your LLM have some kind of back pressure that tells, no, you're doing the thing wrong, so you cannot compile, or you can tune them down if, for example, they don't make sense for your set. So for example, if you want, you can change one of them. For example, you can change any unknown error context that detects any or unknown types in the effect errors or things like that. And when you are okay with the settings that you have, you can just press enter, and then it will ask you for which editors you plan to use. And based on the editors you select, it will give you hints and also pre-select some configurations in order to make your editor work with the LSP. Once you have done that, it will basically show you all of the changes that need to happen. For example, it will add a prepare script, it will add the dependency, it will create the section in your tsconfig, it will also change the schema and also enable the TypeScript-Go settings in order for VS Code-based editors to pick it up. And also there are some guidance that can be useful when you have to perform some specific tasks that are in your editor or outside of the control of the current project. Now we are fine with that, so we can just say yes, and it will basically enable that. And you can see that immediately now I have TSGo enabled. Now that I have done that, what we need to do is exactly as the command says. We can run either pnpm install or Effect TSGo patch. And what it will do is that prepare script we had before will basically swap the standard original TypeScript-Go binary with our own custom one. And now if I reload my editor, we should hopefully see that now we have indeed diagnostics that are baked by TypeScript-Go. And the cat is back.
The cat has returned.
And now this is completely running off that TypeScript-Go. So that means that the performance is way, 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 way faster than the previous implementation we had. Okay, so before going on, I just saw a couple of questions I want to quickly reply. Work for monorepo? Yes, it works for monorepo as well, same as the previous version. It is easier to set up in here because given that it replaces the standard TypeScript-Go binary, there isn't much to do. The only thing that you have to do is ensure that in a TypeScript config that covers the packages of your monorepo, it basically includes the plugins section. Even though TypeScript-Go does not support plugins, we are using the plugins key as point to inject the language service. And this allows you, for example, to have inside of your team people that are using the old version and people that are trying out the new one, and the settings compare one-to-one. So migration or mixed setup should work without problems. And yeah, there's a question that I will answer later on. And yeah, I think that I can go on. So now that we have that, we can see that indeed we can have the basic features that we have. We have our classic and loved hover over the types to see what happens, that we can yield over the yield and see what it can be yielded. And there are also all the classic features that you will have from the classic diagnostics. But we also have something new. Because again, thanks to the performance we have, we can now invest more checking time into give more detailed diagnostics. So what does that mean? So in here we have a very simple example. It is basically just a program that accesses a file system service, and then it is run by using Effect.provide, and it uses a layer that provides everything except the file system and DB connection. So in the end, our call to run promise cannot be performed because the type of this effect requires additional services to be provided, DB connection. The interesting part is that now that we have the performance budget to do so, we can also point inside of the diagnostic the point where the provide has happened. So that means that with one click, I can jump directly into the point where the provide happened. But we can also point out to one layer that could fix that issue. So this is very, very, very valuable information for the LLMs because they can just say, oh, this can fix. So probably I just need to adjust the layer composition in here, and that would solve the problem. And indeed, we can see that if we go here and we change our provide to our provide merge, for example, it will solve the issue we had with the file system. And this again is thanks to the new performance budget we have in TypeScript-Go. And as we had before, we still have support for our refactors. You can, for example, refactor anything into an Effect.fn with failures. It will create our tagged error. It will convert our async await try promise, and we can also have the classic refactor that the Effect teams loves, which is to toggle the type annotation, and there we are. And that's basically it for the refactors. One other new feature, and probably I am bursting through them, so if someone have questions, we can stop, but one other feature that we have is that now the TypeScript LSP, historically the TypeScript version, the Strada version, was not built respecting 100% the LSP protocol. It was kind of a mix of the LSP protocol and a custom protocol. And that is because historically the Strada version was built before the LSP protocol was a thing. The LSP protocol was inspired by the protocol that TypeScript Strada introduced. So some features were not possible in the previous iteration because it was not right LSP protocol. But now we can have features, for example, in here you can see that on the left, I have my outline that the editor provides. And now in here, we have as well custom entries that allows you to quickly jump into part of your effect code, and they are grouped by what they represent. For example, you can see all of the services declared in this specific file, or you can see the layers that are declared. For example, we have here an APR config live, a JSON placeholder live, and an app layer, which is a composition of layers. You can see quickly in here also which are the types that are required and provided, and also same as well for your errors. And this is very nice because when you need like to review your code or jump quickly from one part of the other of the code, I personally use a lot the outline, but again, that depends on your use case. And again, this works also from the top bar, which is this kind of the same API that allows you to change where you want to jump.
Super cool. Love it.
And I've seen a couple of questions that maybe we can go on and try to answer. I don't know where I left. Yeah, work for monorepo we have already answered. Feature for banning all vanilla API would love this effect first development. So good news, there is already a rule that does exactly that. It is off by default, but again, if you run again pnpx effect TSGo setup, and you choose again, there is a rule that's called node built-in import when importing Node.js built-in modules that have Effect native counterparts. And this rule is very useful when doing LLM heavy development because you can force that to be an error so that basically you can ban in your codebase import from the node file system. And now if we apply that, if we try, for example, and now in here, I can, oops, I hate when you open it like that. Okay, you can see that we have in here an error, and yeah, prefer using file system from Effect instead of using the Node.fs module. So this can help you steer a lot your LLM towards preferring effect-driven patterns that are more testable instead of relying on built-in modules. This is one, and I have another one coming up for other global APIs. There is, for example, another one for using JSON parse and JSON stringify that instead if we have json.stringify, whatever, and we do that inside of, for example, effect.gen, we do const x equal, let me just assign that to a program, json.stringify. You can see here that is already suggesting consider using effect schema for JSON operation instead of JSON parse, JSON stringify. So again, this by default is a suggestion, but you can go into your tsconfig and you can change the severity. For example, you can see that now also the tsconfig supports autocompletion for your rules, and that is baked by a custom version of the tsconfig JSON schema that when you run the setup command gets automatically injected. And now we can say, for example, JSON prefer schema over JSON, and we can say error. And now when we save and we go back to our example, you can see in here that now it is an error indeed. And so always try to ban LLMs from using Node.fs. Yes, we have just replied. I ended up writing a bunch of OX-linked rule to prevent native APIs and giving hints what to do instead. Yeah, sure, that's covered the same exact feature. If you have other native APIs that are not covered yet by a diagnostic rule, again, the LSP TSGo version is in alpha, but I am open to issues. I also have backported some of the features that are in the TSGo version to the standard version. So if there is some global API that you will want to enforce instead the effect version pattern, yes, we can force that. I love this, but won't this be kind in vain when the plugin system ship for TSGo? They do want to have a plugin system, right? Well, it's not clear right now. There is like clear statement about what the API story will be for TypeScript-Go, but most probably there won't be plugin systems for TypeScript-Go. There will be new CLIs that wrap around the API provided by TSGo, but unfortunately it seems that the plugins won't be a feature. Is the outline that was shown an LSP feature or a VS Code feature? It is an LSP feature. So right now, if we go to our services, we go to live with Pipeable, you can see in here that we have the comment that describes the layer composition, and you can go to show outline and it will open to you again a Mermaid chart that you can now see and navigate. That is an LSP feature that is basically coded inside of the language service, and whenever we hover something, the language service injects in the JSON doc for that entry the information for the outline. And I would also say one other thing, that is that now that we have basically our own version of the TSGo binary, that means that by default, the diagnostic we see in here for the editor are also feedback by default for the LLM. So that means that if we run pm tsgo and we run -p tsconfig.json, we'll see that the same diagnostic that we see in our editor now are by default also in your TSGo comment. And
super nice.
Yeah, in my experience, that's super nice because LLMs are lazy as so even if you have a check command or whatever in your script, in your harness, whatever, you'll find out that the LLMs, when they got into a very like deep-minded process of coding something, what they'll end up doing is call TSC directly for TypeScript Strada, or TSGo when you use TSGo. And that means that if we had the TypeScript effect diagnostics on another place that's not the standard TypeScript-Go binary, that means that the LLM would have basically avoided them. And instead, by having this, that means that by default, the LLM gets them immediately. And you can see, for example, how nice now this information can be for an LLM to adjust this error by knowing, for example, where the provide happens and where the layer is defined.
I have a selfish feature request.
Yeah, go on.
Can we get a subcommand for the CLI that you built that just allows us to turn rules on and off?
That just, yeah, I mean, by using the setup, basically skipping the...
Yeah, this way we don't have to go through all of the other steps. We can just literally go to, or maybe setup can detect if it's already, I don't know. But it would be nice, because like I find myself when I'm using the LSP very often going to the README to look at the rules names and everything like that. But being able to use the the CLI to just turn rules on and off would be super nice. This is already super cool.
Oh yeah, also another thing that you remembered me I should mention is that one annoying stuff of the previous Strada version, again, as I mentioned before, is that it wasn't fully LSP compliant. So that meant that for some editor, I know, for example, from VSTLS that's used by NVim, for example, the quick fixes won't appear. So you didn't have by default the ability, for example, to say, okay, I want to disable this warning just for this line. And in VS Code was really easy because it supported that custom protocol, but that was not the case for other editors. And the way that we did it in the previous version is that you had it as a refactor instead. But now, that being a standard LSP, that means that now technically they should work with any editor. And so whenever you have over any diagnostic, you can just say, yeah, I want to disable that for this line or for the entire line, and should work more reliably than before, because before it was a madness. But I think that's a good idea, maybe to have a feature that you run a command and you jump directly into severity configuration by skip maybe the other thing, probably just selecting the tsconfig and then jumping straight on into the configuration of the severities for the entire project. I have also an ongoing restructure of this command because it's not so useful to see the rule names like this. Yeah, sure, you see the name, you should see what you do, but I have an ongoing restructure that will show in this CLI as well for each rule a quick and small example of when it triggers and what it will show off. So if you don't know the rule, you don't understand fully what it's showing off, you can see an example that basically shows what it will fix.
Perhaps you can address the question about keeping this in sync with TSGo at this point.
Yeah, so it will be kept, the way the repository is structured. Let me open it up real quick. There we go. So let me increase a little the zoom so we can just see it. Okay, so keeping it in sync with TSGo. So the way that it will work is that for now TSGo is in beta. So that means that there is no guarantee between one pre-release and the other that they behave in the same way. But at some point, TSGo will have one first stable release, or like one first release, and we'll start having different release. The way that the TypeScript, the TSGo version of the Effect plugin is built is that we have basically a TypeScript-Go submodule we have some patches over it that inject just, for example, a couple of callbacks, just one callback that gets called. And the way that it's gonna work is that when TypeScript-Go will enter a couple of stable version, what will happen is that we will have CI jobs that basically what do, they change the commit at which the TypeScript-Go submodule is pinpoint. It will run a couple of commands that generate some bridge code and then build. So that means that by going into having some like middle grounds, we will be able to still be able to support couple of latest versions of standard TSGo. So in that way, you can still have updates to the LSP while pinpointing a specific version of TSGo. And what will also happen is that the setup command, when there will be an official version of the TSGo, the setup command will also fetch and use the specific version of the patched binary that is built on top of the version that you have pinpoint. So that basically the switch will be just a recompilation with additional features. You won't have different versions because you adopted the Effect one. And
Nathan asks, did you already answer the can use that from the command line to provide context for LLMs? I think you did.
Yeah.
Is that already? Yeah, we showed like the output from running the compilation.
Yeah, there is.
There was a random question not related to the Effect TSGo integration, but we can answer that if there are no more TSGo questions, and then we can always revisit TSGo stuff. But so Ratius had asked, is there a front-end framework that plays nicer with Effect v4? Are they all the same right now? I think they're all kind of the same right now. I don't know that there's one better than other.
Yeah.
I'm not really a front-end guy. I have been for like the last week or two working on the new Effect website, but I'm not like a front-end person. So, but in talking with folks, I think they're all pretty much about the same right now.
The problem with most of them is that when you go for front-end framework that also does the backend, most of them try to do some magic that hides the wire, as Mike pointed out last time, or the front-end one usually like there is this problem with like typings that unfortunately React itself, it's not even enough to express like the context in the picture of providing typed errors and dependencies for your components. So I would say as well that any framework you go for, they almost behave in the same way integrating with Effect.
Yep, I agree. Hiding the wire is the biggest pain in the neck in the world. Like, I know people don't like to think about it, but it's just like, I don't know. I think it's kind of silly.
Again, we love to make the same mistake over the time, right?
All over and over and over again. That's how we keep our jobs.
Yeah.
Is there any existing work plans for Solid 2.0 support in Effect Atom Solid? I have no idea. Probably. You'll have to talk to Tim in Discord about that. New Effect website? Yes, it is in progress. It is very early, but we're working on it. I can use... Not ready to hype that up yet. Still very early. I can use TSGo in library, and these libraries could be used as dependencies on programs that not use TS. I'm not sure I understand. Do you get...
I think that you mean using TSGo to build libraries, and then the libraries that you have built do not use TSGo. If that's the question, yes, because in the end you just emit TypeScript files, .dts and JavaScript files, so the tooling does not care, if that's the question. Not sure I've interpreted the question in that way. Exactly. Okay, yeah. So if that's the case, yes. In the end, the TSGo or TSC, in the end, they just output JavaScript file and the .dts file. So it doesn't matter if you are using one or the other.
Oh God, I'm
Also-
already getting questions about the
Your
next
question
version of
about
the
the
website. I regret. I'm not actually working on it. Never mind.
Yeah.
It's not in progress.
It was a troll.
It was a Freudian slip.
I also wanted to say, now that you have mentioned it, the reason why I mentioned before we still have this plugins field is that for that exact same reason, that you can have projects built with TSGo, projects built with standard TypeScript, but also inside a single project you can decide to use the Effect TSGo to build your project, but you can use, for example, the classic language service for your editor because maybe you prefer that. But yeah, that's the gist. Yes. Okay. So
let's see. I'll answer. Will the new Effect website also come with the new v4 docs at the same time? Yes, I guess. I have absolutely no timeline on this. I'm committing to nothing. It could be months. Because
it depends.
It depends. I'm reworking like every aspect of the website. So yeah. I have to say, coming from Erlang Rust, I actually feel very productive in Effect. It's been a great experience and looking forward to making great production grade services faster. That's wonderful. Please let us know what we can do better.
Yeah. That's so nice to hear.
I've actually found that people coming from Rust to Effect sort of get the mental model a little bit faster. And I think it's because, like, for folks coming, especially from like async Rust, especially coming from like async Rust, like the whole task, like stuff with, like, for example, Tokyo, sort of kind of feels familiar. When you like it's kind of analogous to like fibers and Effect. So I don't know, the mental shift is not as great if you're coming from like async Rust into Effect. I feel like folks actually feel reasonably productive. Plus, people are used to dealing with like wrappers around types and everything like that, so it's like less of a mental shift. But you are committing. No, I'm not. I'm not committing to anything. Theoretically, if you're working on the new site, I'd say that months out is way faster than I was expecting. Great. Actually, it's going to be years. Let's just put years on that.
Millennial.
It could be millennia.
It could be millennia. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Oh, that's fantastic indeed.
What I find with Effect is it allows me to slide in and out modules without having to rewrite huge areas of code. Yeah, that's a hallmark of like the service-based design. Like taking like, or maybe not design, maybe approach is a better way, like Mattia said. But yeah, like when you have your whole app structured as services, like composing them together in different ways becomes much easier. In my experience, like it just becomes way simpler.
Yeah, and also the dependency injection that Effect has is so that simple but so damn powerful that, for example, if you had the unpleasure in the past to work with Inversify.js, for example, that's like a madness to do like dependency injection. Whereas with Effect is like, okay, that's your requirement channel. Provide me the requirements and I'll run. That's so nicely, and also the LLMs get it so quickly.
I'm answering absolutely no more questions on the new website. You can ask me all you want. Max, 30 minutes is the new month. Didn't you get the LLM memo? LL memo? Yeah, exactly. I was gonna tweet about this, and then I didn't. I don't know why, but I just despite giving the LLMs a tremendous amount of good context, like really doing a work on context engineering and trying to make that the context that they get really, really good, they still devolve into madness on the front end. Like it doesn't matter. I feel like it literally doesn't matter what you do, because all these frameworks have so much magic built into them. Like the LLMs just get confused and start doing weird stuff right away. They make a mess of components. They I don't know. Maybe I'm doing it wrong. Maybe I don't have enough skills installed or something. But and by not enough, I mean I have 0 installed. But the only thing that they do well is the stuff with Effect. When I give it the repository and tell it, hey, look at this repo. I want to use Atom for this. Review the code. Let's spec out something with Atom. And they can do that, but then the actual front end pieces of the code just look like garbage. So I don't know. That's my current challenge is I find myself doing a lot of handwriting of stuff to give the LLM patterns, and then sort of after it has an example to look at, then it seems to do a little bit better. I don't know.
They are. I always get the feeling that the LLM is just a copying monkey. So you need first to give it a good pattern, and then it can okay, I see the what's similar to what you are asking me in here. So maybe I can try to snatch that. And sometimes it works beautifully, because that if you have some starting point, that's great, nice. But then trying to start copying bad patterns end up in even worse patterns that gets copied over time.
Yeah, and yeah, I don't know. It's just it devolves into madness, and I get frustrated. So, what is the? I've joined the Effect Discord. Is the person you referred me to a moderator with the name Tim Dumb? No, I was referring to Tim Smart, but please don't ping contributors directly in our Discord. We get tons of messages every day, and it's actually against our community guidelines to ping folks directly. So just ask a question in one of the relevant channels, based on the question you want to ask, and we'll get to it eventually. Otherwise, our Discord, otherwise I just literally we'll close Discord because it's just pinging all day. The cluster doc page will take 24 hours to read. Why am I still reading comments about the website? I don't know. For libraries, is it still a recommendation to use import everything as Effect from Effect? Yes, because it's not an Effect thing, it's a bundler thing. If you want to take advantage, if your bundler doesn't support deep scope analysis, deep tree shaking, which most modern bundlers don't. I think the only ones that do are rollup, if configured with rollup, and I think Webpack.
I think so, but it's not good as the one from rollup.
Yeah, rollup is probably the best in terms of deep scope analysis. I haven't tested roll down.
It does as well.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah. So maybe you could use roll down too, and then you could have the import, the namespace imports or the module imports instead of the namespace imports, whatever. But Mattia has I think a rule in the Effect LSP to enforce namespaced imports.
Yes, you can say.
Which one of you is the streamer? It's my Twitch channel. Darshan. Sorry I missed you in the Twitch chat earlier. Welcome to the stream.
There is a rule which is no barrel import, if I recall correctly. Import from barrel, yeah. You can set import from barrel to error, and every time you import package from a barrel package, it will give you whatever setting you have set to. So that way, again, if you are probably building an app, probably if you are not too much concerned with the tree shaking, that's off by default. But if you enable this one, it can prevent you from importing from barrel and instead import as namespace.
Yeah, and I think you can actually configure it very nicely as well. Like if you only want to scope that rule to effect, right? I think there's like configuration. I don't know if you just said that. I was reading the chat.
No, I didn't, but you pointed out a right thing, because there is a config setting that you can say barrel import packages, and packages that should be preferred imported from the top level barrel. And this one is the one that says when you enable that rule, you can say, okay, those rules, those packages are allowed to be imported from the barrel. And you also have things like namespace import packages, when you can set the names of packages. We can maybe show this off. For example, if I go back to my editor and I
I think the setting is on in the small repo too, if you didn't want to have to do it manually.
Oh, well, that's quick. I can just say in here effect. And now if I go into any and I say, for example, ensuring, you'll see that by default, when I hit the auto completion in here from any of that, the default behavior is again to rewrite that as a namespace import, and then it prefixes with whatever you want. So for example, again, stream, we can see stream and sharing. And the same goes for any package you want, and it works basically for any package, not just effect. Whichever package has basically export declaration in the package JSON that points to the same symbol at the barrel file, it will prefer the specific one instead of the barrel file. Yeah, words, but that's what you get out of it. And you can also specify things like if you want the opposite behavior, if you're, for example, again, if you are using a roll down or roll up or whatever that has specific like handling of barrel, you can again use barrel import packages, and instead it will trigger into the opposite behavior or preferring the barrel. The last one that's probably interesting is import aliases, which allows, I don't remember, I think that I already have that in the TSGo version as well. Import aliases, yes, I could say, for example, that effect should be E. And if I recall correctly, now, if I have, say that we have an import from stream, and then we say succeed from effect, it will use E as name for the namespace instead of effect. That is useful because, again, there are some cases where the example that's pointed in the README, array is not good because some compiler cannot like detect if you're referring to global array or array imported as a namespace. So you can set in here, yeah, want to import array as R, so that way you avoid that kind of conflict.
Recommended effect tutorial, V3 or V4? I would just go V4 at this point. Like we're really working very hard on V4. I feel like it's slowing down in terms, I mean, not slowing down in general, but like there's not a beta release every single day now. So I feel like you could probably start going in on V4 and like, you know, it's also good because the more people using it, the more feedback we get. So the more fixes we can make, if there are any, or like add missing features, etc. That's really cool. I feel like I haven't been using the effect language service to the fullest potential. Yes, me either. But I literally ripped out all of the other language services protocol or language servers from my NeoVim config this morning, and I put TSGo in there, and I'm going all in on Mattia's TSGo LSP.
Now that you mentioned it, there is probably also another rule that I want to show off if there isn't any other question.
There is another question, but it's not related to the TSGo, so we can show your rule and then we'll talk about the question.
We spoke last week about Effect.fn, right? So roll back to what we did like last week. We mentioned that probably when you have in your code patterns as this, for example, when you have like an arrow function that returns an effect, that's probably a great opportunity to instead use Effect.fn because that allows, again, to first, in case the body of the effect is implemented as a generator, it avoids to reallocate the generator for each invocation of the function by reusing the same allocation each time, but also it improves the traces if you are using a traced version of Effect.fn. And so I wanted just to show off and remember, for those of you who wouldn't know, that in the LSP there is a setting that you can do and is Effect FN. And by default, this setting has basically few variants that controls whenever you can suggest and should use Effect.fn instead of like the arrow function or the function returning an effect. And you can say by default it is span. So by default, the LSP will suggest using Effect.fn only if and only if there is Effect.span So if we have something like this, the LSP will suggest you to use, maybe if I say it will suggest to use the Effect.fn, but there is also this setting. Let's see if it works, or if I break something. If you use, you have also inferred span, which means that in all of those locations where the function is exported globally or is a method of a service, you can basically infer the name from the span by having the name of the span being the exported function or the service name dot the method name. So if I enable inferred span and I go back to my service, yes, you can see here now that the diagnostic triggers can be written as a reusable function, Effect.fn JSON placeholder.get to do, and it also has quick fixes that says, okay, just rewrite as Effect.fn, and there you go. And now you have Effect.fn. And that's really handy, again, if you're writing application code. You can basically set that setting all together with, for example, saying that Effect.fn opportunity to be an error. So that way you can force your LLM to do basically correct tracing of your effect services. And there you go. So basically that way you can enforce your LLM to provide good span names for your services. And also, again, for globally exported things.
Having span and inferred span is required in the config?
It depends. Let me try to say it in a better way. So the Effect.fn opportunity setting that you see here is the setting that controls the severity you want for the message.
Right.
And Effect.fn controls which kind of patterns should be reported by the Effect.fn opportunity. And the default is span, which means that with span, it will suggest to use Effect.fn only if it was an arrow function that returns a generator with a span name. So if you already provided a span name, it will suggest to rewrite to an Effect.fn. Inferred span is an additional setting that says, okay, other than where I already have set a span name, you can also suggest me locations where you could probably infer the span name either from this service name. In this case, we have just seen, we have a JSON placeholder service. So it can be JSON placeholder dot the name of the method, and also things like const my method equals arg number fact succeed arg. Okay, and it can also be set up in order to trigger in this kind of situations as well. And there are also other settings. For example, we have suggested span, which is suggested in a less strong way by the inferred. The inferred, again, is very hard, and suggested span instead is basically wherever it sees that there is a complex in a function that probably could better, but also untraced. And untraced, for example, should trigger for, let me see if it works or if I have a bug in here. Yeah, I probably have a bug in here, because it should trigger by setting the untraced, it will trigger for any function that returns an effect that's not an Effect.fn.
Okay, cool.
Not sure.
Is the TSGo LSP v4 only? Yes, I think.
No, it is both v4 and v3.
Mattia the goat.
It has, if you go to the, let me, my window management today is not good. If you go to the repository, you'll find out that there is like a comparison table that says any rule, if it applies to version 3 or version 4, you'll find some rules that apply to version 3 and to 4, some to 4 and not to 3, and vice versa. For example, Effect Gen uses adapter is not needed anymore in Effect v4 because the adapter parameter has been deprecated, or generic effect services because Effect v4 has not the effect.service pattern. But usually all of them support v3 as well. Again, the LSP is about 90% the same as the previous one. There are some rules that I did not port it yet, specifically the CodeGen stuff, because I have not seen so many users use them. And now also we have an official CLI for doing CodeGen of, for example, interfaces from schemas and something like that. So it makes less sense for the LSP to do that.
What else do we have in here? Wait, so the LSP is available in TSGo now? I am cracky. I would suggest taking a look at the Effect TS/TSGo repository. Basically, the long and short of it is it's a replacement for TSGo, which embeds TSGo as well as all the Effect LSP rules and a bunch of other stuff. So you can set it up with like the npx, pnpx, whatever your package manager is. Add effect/lsp setup, and it'll guide you through the setup of the TSGo version of the LSP. But yeah, or you can watch this video back and see like all the discussion we've had on the TSGo version of our LSP. But that's essentially what it is.
Yeah.
What is the state of the service map versus context war? I think Mike won, but thus far he hasn't forced us to change the name yet, so we haven't. But I feel like at some point soon service map will be renamed back to context, but everything inside the module will stay the same. So it'll be like service map dot service. I mean, sorry, context dot service instead of service map dot service. But again, like low priority change. Shoot, I just made everything following v3. I guess I'll have to spend the weekend moving to v4. Shouldn't be too big of a lift, I'll be honest. Like I I ported a relatively large app the other weekend, and it really wasn't too bad. It was mostly schema changes, so shouldn't be too bad. Do you recommend using the TSGo LSP then for Effect v4? I recommend it. I don't care what Mattia says.
I mean, I would recommend it as well, mostly because thing has changed a lot from like last year. We went basically from coding by hand like prehistoric men to having LLM speed out.
Prehistoric men. We were
To have
cavemen
LLM.
last year, everyone.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
So given now we have like a lot of LLM coding, and now speed about how fast you give feedback loops to the LLM is very important, and the speed of which the TSGo version can output the diagnostic is like at least 7 times faster than the previous implementation. So you can just give your LLM, okay, type whatever you want on your keyboard and run the LSP, and eventually you'll find the solution.
I mean, and also like if you're not using TSGo in your project yet, you could just use it for the LSP piece. Like you could still compile. Like we do that in V4. We use TSGo for some checks locally, but in CI we still run the regular TypeScript compiler. So yeah, I mean, it's worth considering. Or you could just use the regular Effect language service LSP if you're not ready to go in on TSGo yet. So.
Yeah, again, the beauty is that the settings are named the same, so you can basically have one place that configures it and then switch to whatever you want for the project, for the machine, for whatever you want.
This is an interesting question for you, Mattia. Many of the options, like prefer schema over JSON, seem like desirable defaults. Is there a way to just enable a strict mode and only disable a few that you don't want, or?
I have in my backlog now that I have, again, more performance budget. On my backlog, I want to implement a preset feature that right now, all of the rules right now are by default follow the logic that if the rule adds something that would already have been a TypeScript error, the rule will go into an error. If the rule would add something that is an anti-pattern, will go into a warning, and everything else that means that you have code that can be improved will go into suggestion. That is like the current default and the current logic that the LSP follows, and that's mostly for allowing a seamlessly interchange between the standard TypeScript and the LSP version. What you are asking for is exactly what I want to work on next time, which is basically allowing presets. Because given the rules we have, we could have presets that say, for example, the presets Effect native. And the Effect native preset, for example, sets the severity to error for any rule that bans internals, like node built-in internals, fetch, or whatever. And so what you're asking is, yeah, that will be coded as a strict preset, and we will have basically one preset. So that way, what will happen is that when you will run your setup command, instead of asking if you want to customize the severities, what will happen is that it will ask you which preset you want to use. And if you choose custom, you can customize the severities. Otherwise, you can choose between some presets that we will code. And again, up to now, I have thought about 3 presets that are, again, Effect native, which is ban every internal, fully adopt Effect, strict, which is basically banning everything that is an anti-pattern, and the other one is the default one, which is suggestions.
Question again to Mattia: is the LSP extensible in the sense of adding custom rules? I think the answer is no, but I'm going to let Mattia answer.
No. Again, as we have maybe I explained myself wrong before, but the thing is that unfortunately, even the new LSP is written in Go, and the problem is that now you have the point where the compilation of your code happens is inside of the Go environment, in the binary Go environment. And so that means that one binary cannot load in Go plugins in a platform agnostic way. So even if Go had plugins, they could not be in JavaScript, because if they were in JavaScript, probably they will be way slower, because then you would have Go and a JavaScript engine inside of Go. Or if you had things like, for example, binary plugins, there could be security issues. And again, this is the reason why the standard TypeScript-Go at the moment does not provide plugins. The only way they provide is APIs, and those APIs are exported by the Go binary, and you can access those API via IPC calls. And now that I mention it, I would just want to mention as well that given the Effect TSGo is a straight replacement for the TSGo binary, that means that if you have some other tools that consumes the TSGo in order to have the APIs to get the diagnostics for a file or whatever, they'll be available to that tool as well, because again, we will export in the APIs our diagnostics as well.
There was also a question about wanting to understand a little bit more about this new v4 schema top and bottom, so not quite related to the LSP, but we don't have any more LSP questions that I can see. So maybe we'll take a minute and look at the schema stuff, and then if anybody has any other questions as we go, we can answer those. But I can steal the screen from you, Mattia, and talk a tiny bit about schema. Screen window. Let me make this 1 or 2 ticks bigger. So forgive me for not maybe using the most correct nomenclature here. I wish we had Julio on one time to talk about schema, but basically the question was related to the top and bottom interfaces in schema, and like what they mean and how they're used and like what their purpose is. So there is a section in the schema.md file in Effect that goes over this. It's kind of like an advanced topic, and it's mentioned like specifically that this is really not needed to use schema, and it's more for like any library authors or advanced users who want to understand the schema type system or who need to tap into it. But schema, just like in v3, the v4 schema is a strongly typed wrapper around an untyped AST node. So like if you look at the internal, like if you look inside a schema, it's basically just a typed wrapper around an AST node that has no type information whatsoever. So you can see it here on the bottom interface that a schema holds an AST that's untyped. And then we have all these types that kind of like wrap around it to make it type safe. And so in v4, the number of type parameters that we track has gone from 3 up to 14.
A 7x almost.
To allow for like basically tracking as much information as we can. And it does lend itself quite a bit to flexibility. But obviously, like staring at an interface in your editor that looks like this, like seeing all these type parameters whenever you hover over a schema would be pretty awful. And so in v4, there's kind of like a hierarchy of types related to schema. So bottom is literally the most bottom type of a schema. It's it's the type with the most information related to it. And so like if you need access to all of these types, then you would obviously be using the bottom type. But most like schema usage really only needs these first 4 type parameters, which are the out type, like the decoded type, the encoded type, the requirements for decoding, and the requirements for encoding. So while bottom is like kind of the bottommost, most specific in terms of type parameter, like interface for schema, I think most folks will probably end up using codec or optic as their like wrapper around schema. Codec is like one step up from bottom, and it allows you to represent the encoded, decoded type and the requirements for each independently. So it's kind of like takes these first 4 type parameters, allows you to specify them, and then lets the rest of them default to whatever makes the most sense for that schema. And then if we go one more step up in terms of the type hierarchy here, there's schema, which only cares about the decoded type, and it defaults the encoded type to the decoded type, if I'm not mistaken. I think so.
I think so as well, yeah.
And then top is, again, the top. It can represent like any schema. It's kind of like a schema.any almost. Not quite, but like it represents like the topmost schema. So top and bottom come from category theory. Again, Julio and Mike will like rail me for like this terrible explanation I'm about to give, but
yeah.
Bear with
we have the two best person to explain these on stream today.
Yeah, really. Basically, in category theory, like a top and a bottom type are representations of like the two sides of a spectrum of a type. And if we take the category theory out of it and we just think about it in terms of like, okay, practical usage, schema.top is like a really good extension point if you're building V4 schemas. So like if you have a generic constraint you need to enforce that does not care about these type parameters, like you want to just say X is a schema, right? Then your generic constraint would be X extends schema.top in V4, because that basically means it's some schema, any schema. But if you do need type constraints, like if you need to constrain the decoded type, or if you want to have more control and constrain like the decoded and encoded type, you can use codec. But there are also like some type helpers in schema. So we can see the type helpers, and then we can actually see an example of this. Let me go into source, and over here let me go into unstable CLI, and we'll just look at maybe flag, and then we'll take a look at the helpers. So hopefully you folks are tracking me, but top and bottom are basically the spectrum of a schema type, right? Top meaning like it's some schema, but we don't care about the type constraints. Bottom is like the most specific you can get in terms of type parameters for a schema. And the terminology comes from category theory, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe from Haskell, or maybe both.
I love how you describe them, because I always love to describe them as sets, where like top is the sets that's more larger. So if you have a specific element, there are more probability that that element fits in the larger set, rather than going down into bottom that you have a more like strict set, and it's less elements, less type can fit into that set.
Yeah, exactly. That's and yeah, it's actually a really good way to think about it as well, if it helps folks who don't like the terminology. But there are type helper wrappers around like codec, right? So if you have a schema that's only decoding something, right, you only care about decoding, you can use the decoder type, which says like I have it's basically like a wrapper around codec where you know the decoded type, but the encoded type is unknown. So like there's type helpers in here that fit somewhere in between the type hierarchy here, like decoder and encoder sort of fit in between schema and codec. And they're useful for, again, like situations where you need to restrict the generics for a schema. So in V4, you have it's a lot easier to put generic constraints on a schema. Whereas in V3, it's much more difficult to put generic constraints on a schema. So we can take a quick like look at a very simple example of this. But in the CLI module, in the flag module, there's a file schema method that I actually fixed recently because it was not correct. But here, the schema that we want to take in here is a decoder, because file schema behind the scenes will read the file that you give it, or the file that's provided on the command line, and it'll parse that file using whatever format you specify. So the schema here just needs to be able to go from that unknown parsed shape. So it's parsed into like a JavaScript object or type or whatever. It's an unknown thing, but it's like in JavaScript. It's no longer a string, right? It's been parsed from a string into something useful. And you now just need to give it a schema that can go from unknown to the type that you want. And that's exactly what like decoder is for. It's to take some unknown and convert it into a type of A in this case. And the encoder type is the opposite. It takes an encoded type that you specify and encodes it to unknown. So you only need to care in this case about it takes an unknown decoded type and encodes it to something represented by E. So it's kind of useful for like serialization boundaries. So anyway, I hope that the hierarchy of types here makes a little more sense. I'm not going to go too much into optic because it's kind of like a separate branch of schema. We talked about optics on like a separate office hours. But yeah, basically top and bottom are just the two ends of the spectrum of the type hierarchy for a schema. Is there a way to have wait, let me just scroll back up for a second. Type param stonks go up. Bye.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Maybe there'll even be more. Question: Do you find tackle issues with submitted PRs to be more chaos than helpful? There seems to be an internal backlog of issues, effect number that is being preferred for finding solutions. The effect number issues are Tim's like clanker, his LLM, his like orchestration thingy. So yes, I mean, we obviously like when issues come along with PRs, but like we're a small team and we're in a lot of different directions. We also are part of a company that's trying to build something. So we do our best to review issues and PRs, but you have to give us a little bit of leeway to get to things. But we do try our best. If we miss something, I apologize. It's just the nature of maintaining open source, but we do try to keep up with things. Is there a way to have a decode only transform? I sometimes have no need to care about the encoding bit. It's one way. I think so.
Yeah, I think that's.
Isn't it like what's it called? The decode 2?
Yeah, I think so. It's basically a transformation that takes in data from the wire. Yeah. And pass through. Yeah, there's an example.
Yeah, this is a more involved example, I guess, but like I think to have a valid transformation, you need to specify how to decode and then how to re-encode back. Otherwise, the schema is no longer a valid schema because you're only going one way. There are ways to encode one-way only transformations, but that's not a transformation anymore. That's like I forget the term that Julio uses in here. There's an example of this in XML. XML. Here we go. Yeah, encoders, he calls them, where you only are going one way. Like once you do this schema to encoder XML schema, this thing can only go one way. Once you encode that piece of data, you can't go backward. To have a valid transformation, you have to be able to go both ways, encode and decode. So one way you could do that is if you're decoding to some piece of data and then the encode you don't care, you just kind of want like the identity, you can use this pattern. So schema.decode to this type, and then specifying like the decode and the encode sides. For the encode side, you could just pass through the value. But yeah, to have a valid transformation, you need a decode and an encode. Otherwise, it's not valid anymore. We read data from an external API, transform it for our own needs. No need for encoding it back. Yeah, just use this pattern then. And like in V4, transformations are like reusable. Like you can define a transformation as a data type, and there's examples of that in the schema like transformation module. So we can go in here. Schema transformation. And you can look at like the various examples of this. Where can we find one? So make allows you to define a reusable transformation, but you can also like build them up from more primitive like transformations.
Chaining
So
them up.
yeah, exactly. So you can, if you want to make your transformation more reusable, you could define it and then use it wherever you want in your decode to APIs. So like here's an example. You could extract this transformation here to a value, and then you could have like a decode to where you just specify that transformation, that reusable transformation. But yeah, I think there was also a question earlier that when I was talking about the type hierarchy, that wanted me to relate the hierarchy of types to schema representation. And we've talked about this before on different office hours, but the schema representation module doesn't really have anything to do with the type hierarchy for schema. It's like it's a way to represent schemas that can be transmitted over the wire. So like if you have a schema of a user and you want to be able to send that full schema over the wire, not like the user, but like the schema for said user over the wire, you can do that with the schema representation module, which sits between the AST and external formats. So it basically describes the shape of a schema in a way that is serializable. So not all schemas fit like into this, right? There are particular
things.
Yeah, particular schemas, like things that can't be serialized. But Julio's done a ton of work.
Yeah, it is like it is awesome because you can consider that kind of like a file format to persist a schema and reconstruct the schema from the file format. To say in like very dumb way to explain it, it's like if you can like save something and persist that into an encoded wire or something. For example, you can persist like this is a number, a structure that has 3 properties, and the third one is a number. Okay, you can persist that into a structure and revive that, and send into the wire, revive that on the other side. But you cannot do that, for example, with custom transformations by default, because there is no way to define a function and then send it over the wire and then reconstruct the function definition over the other side. So you cannot do that. But you can, if I recall you correctly, you can implement like revivers, I think that they are called. And so that if you define your custom declare, and so basically you define your own entries for the file format of the schema, then you can have on both sides revivers that basically take in the declare and reconstruct the function, because maybe you cannot send the same function over the wire, but you can have the same copy of the function definition on both sides and just share a pointer, which is basically the declare saying, yeah, I want that function, and the schema will be revived using that function.
Yeah, I mean, this is like a simple example, but like, for example, if you have a person schema here, you can use schema representation to create a representation from the person AST. So you get like what's called a document back. And then you can take said generic like schema representation document and you can do things with it. So built in right now, we have like a JSON schema document thingy. So you can take your document and use schema representation to convert the document for your person schema into a JSON schema. And then later on, after you send this over the wire, you can then reconstruct said said person schema from the JSON schema using schema representation to schema doc. And like you would obviously first have to take the JSON schema, convert it back to a document, etc. But there's helpers for that, and the module documentation here does a pretty good job of outlining like what we currently support. There was a question in chat about converting to a like
to a flat binary.
I don't think we support that out of the box, but could you build your own like schema representation helpers to do that? Yeah, sure. But you would probably have to look.
I think that it would be almost like straight up simple, because the schema representation is like something that by default is plain data that can be sent over the wire. So if you decide basically to convert that into a structure and then like serialize that structure with JSON or whatever, even without going the JSON schema route, adopting basically the schema representation, you can persist that into your storage and then reconstruct your schema from that representation. Again, there are the same limitations apply that we have discussed before, that you need to provide the revivers for custom types or filters or whatever, but that should allow you to do that. Because if I recall correctly, the schema representation structure in the end is something that is wire safe by default.
We kind of want to read a zip and a worker, then do threaded reads of files within that zip file, and then send the data back to the main thread, which converts it back to a proper JSON object. Sure, you could try using schema representation for that. Let's see how it goes. We don't have anything built in for doing that at the moment, but I think this module could be useful. Can you convert to JDSL? What's JDSL?
What?
JDSL software. The
Java data
JSON
structures.
Is it this thing? JDiesel? No, I mean not built in at the moment. You can make your own. I'm sure you can make your own schema representation for this. JDSL is a running gag. Got it. I'm not in on the joke. JDiesel. Anyway, yeah, you could probably define your own schema representations for lots of things. But at the moment, the purpose of this module is primarily JSON schema stuff, but it's very flexible. So you can do quite a bit.
And again, if I recall correctly, the schema representation is a higher level representation rather than the JSON schema one. So if you have a lot of custom things that you want to encode and the JSON schema doesn't support, the schema representation probably does. So if you don't have to deal with third parties consuming the JSON schema, you can probably stick with the schema representation.
Any other questions for folks? We've been going for about an hour and a half, so we'll probably wrap up here. But if there's any last minute questions, please get them in. We'll try to answer them quickly. But and if we didn't answer your question, or if there's something you didn't feel comfortable asking on stream or whatever, feel free to post in the Discord in our office hours channel, and we'll be happy to answer any questions that you folks have. But yeah, thank you all very much for joining today. Really appreciate everybody coming by and asking good questions. Go try the Effect LSP. Go try the TSGo version and let Mattia know what bugs you find.
Whatever. Yeah.
And What is the name of the cat is the final question we will answer
today. It's called Lily.
Lily.
Like Lily Potter.
Lily Potter. Love it. All right, everybody. Thank you very much for joining. Have a good rest of your day. And thank you, Mattia, again for the wonderful rundown of the LSP.
Thank you, everyone.
Cheers, folks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.